Montgomery from Journeys Healthcare. I'm going to spend a few minutes with you today talking about the Hoyer HML600. The HML600 has a 600-pound weight capacity, and I'm going to explain the operation of it and then move on through slings and applications. To start with operation, you have a standard remote pendant, and it's actually pictograph design, so you have an up arrow for up and a down arrow for down. You've additionally got a closed picture and open picture for the base for the adjustment of those. Battery mounts in the rear, and it's actually a finger release so that you can move that battery up. And the key to putting it back in place is lining up the base and the top and dropping it straight in place until you hear it click. Now, moving down from the battery, there's a red button here, and that red button is our emergency stop button. We use this generally in two instances. If there's a patient issue while you're doing a lift and you need to stop the process, you can simply push that in. That'll stop the lift. And then to release it, just turn it and it'll pop back out. The other time we want to use that, we want to push that in whenever we're done with our lifts, if we park the lifter in the hallway or if we're in between lifts, because by doing so we shut down the equipment and it will not drain the battery. Now, below the emergency stop button, you'll see there's an emergency and a down arrow. There's a detent there. If I take the tip of a pen and push that in, that'll actually help me to lower the lifter. In an instance where I lift a resident up in the air and the remote stops working, I can bypass that remote by using the tip of a pen there and go ahead and lower the lifter back down. Moving down below that, you'll see I've got a power cord right here. In between uses or at the end of a shift, in between transfers, I can use this to plug the lifter in. This is actually how we recharge the battery. Simply moving that to the outlet and plugging it in. And when we're not charging it, we can go ahead and wrap that power cord back up and keep it out of the way. Moving to the actuator here where my right hand is, you'll see there's an emergency down or emergency descent. This is designed to help us lower the lift if for whatever reason all power shuts off and we don't have a battery or don't have the ability to lower the lift in any other way. Rather than having a resident or patient suspended in the air and manually trying to remove them or bring them down, I can simply lift that up, and that actually only involves bringing it up about a ½ inch. And when I do that, if there's weight on the lifter, it'll go ahead and lower back down. At the base of the lift, you'll see I've got locking casters. Both of the rear casters have locks on them. The only time we engage those, and we do so simply by pushing down with the edge of our shoe, the only time we lock those is during a floor lift, if we're picking a resident or patient up off the floor, or when we're parking the lift and it's not in service. During a normal transfer from a chair to a bed, from a bed to a chair, we do not lock the casters because we want the lifter to be able to move and maintain its own center of gravity with that resident or patient in place. Moving to the front of the lift, you'll see here I have a 4-point cradle. The 4-point cradle is designed with 360-degree swivel, so if I have to approach a patient from the side, I can swivel the cradle and do so underneath the bed, in a chair, whatever position it might be. And the way the cradle is designed, you have 2 connection points for the shoulders of the sling and 2 connection points for the legs of the sling. Generally speaking, as the cradle faces that patient or resident, the 2 facing them are for the shoulder connections, the 2 away from them are for the leg connections. Now I'm going to move on to the sling and give you a basics of the sling. This is a universal sling, and the universal sling, as with all the other ones, has a label on it, and that label is going to tell me what size the sling is, in this instance it being a size medium. Universal sling is designed for most of, if not all of our transfers. Probably 95% of the time this will be effective. It's got 2 sets of loops for the shoulders as well as multiple loops for the legs so that you can adjust for sitting transfers or reclining transfers. Thank you. Before we begin our transfer, it's important for each facility to make a determination whether there will be 1 caregiver or 2 caregivers completing a transfer. I'm going to demonstrate completing a transfer from chair to bed, doing it with a single caregiver myself, but each facility needs to make that determination whether they'll use 1 or 2 caregivers in each situation. Now, prior to doing the transfer, I want to communicate to the patient what the transfer is going to entail. In this instance, we're going to transfer from the chair to the bed, and I'm also going to pre-position my lifter. I'm going to do that by lowering the cradle to about chest height and by opening the base so that I can actually work the lifter in close and not have to worry about working around the wheelchair legs. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open my sling and prep that. I'm going to center myself on the patient and lean him or her forward to me, and I'm going to fit that sling in place, drawing each of the legs around and down through the sides. And after I've got the back placed, I'll going to lean that patient back, and I'm going to work from the sides. I'm going to draw each leg down. Now, you'll notice that I've actually removed one of the chair arms from the wheelchair. That's for convenience, so that you can see how I'm fitting the leg appropriately. From here, I'm actually going to elevate the patient's leg, and there are two ways we can do that. I can either elevate their leg on top of mine, which gives me room to work underneath their leg, or if they don't have the ability to flex like that, I can elevate their leg and place their foot on top of my foot. Now I'm going to draw the side of this sling down, make sure that I've got the proper fit, and draw it underneath that patient's leg until I've got a good fit and the straps are in good place. Allow him to hold that in place for me while I move to the other side, and you'll be able to see effectively here. I'm going to take the outside edge, which is the part running along the base of it, elevate the patient's leg again, either on mine, leg on my leg, or foot on my foot. Using my hand, I'm going to work that sling in place. That minimizes the friction of placing that sling. Now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the two straps, I'm actually going to feed one through the other so that I've got the straps crossed. After having done so, I'm going to bring the equipment forward. And again, we want to have it about chest height. That'll give us the right height for fitting the sling. And as I bring it forward, I can go ahead and make my connections. As I said before, we want to make the leg connections on the 2 points of the cradle away from the patient. We want to make our shoulder connections on the 2 points closest to the patient. Now we're going to instruct the patient to give themselves a hug and begin our lift process. I did have the wheels of the wheelchair or the locks of the wheelchair locked. As I lift the patient up, I'm going to disengage those. I'm going to rotate the patient, making sure that I retain contact with them. Move the chair out of the way. I'm going to rotate my patient so that they're going to fit into the bed appropriately, and then I'm going to make my transfer. As I'm doing so, I'm going to close the base so that it will fit appropriately underneath that bed. Make sure that I elevate their feet so that they fit properly on. And then visually ensure that as I lower them, they're in the right place. Stretch your legs out forward, please. There we go. We want to ensure that we've got the patient centered on the bed and in the proper place. And as we lower it, we can go ahead and start removing our connections once they've made contact with the bed. First thing we'll want to do then is move the equipment out of the way. And after having done so, we'll go ahead and remove the sling. The easiest way to remove the sling is by first uncrossing the legs, and then using the friction-free method, we'll actually draw that sling out and away from each side so that there's no friction. And then simply roll the patient to me, tuck the top half in, pull the patient away from me, and remove it. Now, after having positioned the patient, we can make sure that their comfort is correct, they're positioned correctly in the bed, and we can continue with providing our care or whatever our next step would be. If we're going to actually remove the patient from the bed and transfer them to a chair, we would do the reverse. We would place the sling underneath them, position the lifter appropriately, make the connections, transfer them from the bed to the chair. Again, with the wheelchair, we want to ensure that the locks are locked so that when we lower them into the chair, they're fitted properly. Thank you.